Don't trust these people with nuclear capacity.
Iran is intensifying its destructive role in the region.
It sends a chill down your spine to think what they would do if they had a nuclear umbrella.
The worst thing that could happen is to trust Iran.
Iran is not any other country.
And this is a very bad deal that the president is leading us into.
You don't do business with people like that.
Senate Foreign Relations Committee gearing up to vote on a bill that would require congressional approval of any nuclear agreement with Iran. But President Obama, he is threatening to veto that bill. Senator Lindsey Graham joins us. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you very much. We're going to override his veto.
Are you sure? Can you get the votes?
Absolutely. I think we'll have enough Democrats who will say the following. Mr. President, you negotiate the deal. You're the commander-in-chief. You're the president. But when it comes to lifting congressional sanctions that we created with a 100-0 vote, we're going to have a say before you lift those congressional sanctions.
All right, so when this bill, this Corker bill, I think it's next week is going to get voted on it.
It may slip a little bit because they're asking to the end of the month to finish the framework agreement.
What takes so long to write these things? I mean, you know, really?
When you're chasing the Iranians around, you know, and trying to get a deal at all costs.
Oh, you mean the framework of the...
yeah, well, the Iranians are dragging this out. Why wouldn't they?
But what impact does that have on your bill? Well, all you want is your say. So you should get your bill in.
Democrats are saying the following. We're going to allow them to the end of the month now to negotiate a framework agreement, then all bets are off.
Okay, but I mean, I still don't get it. I still don't get like why you can't just get your bill done. In the event that there is a deal struck, the president knows the rules.
Democrats are saying that voting on a bill, even reviewing it after the fact, would be disruptive. They bought into what the president's saying. But here's the good news. At the end of March, all bets are off. Congress will take up legislation to review any deal with Iran before we relieve congressional sanctions. And here's what the president needs to understand. If you go to the UN Security Council and you try to bypass the Congress to get this deal approved by the UN Security Council but not come to your own Congress, then you're going to risk Congress cutting off money to the United Nations.
All right, well, okay, one of the thoughts is if he goes to the UN, and the UN lifts all its sanctions, but the U.S. still has its sanctions in place.
We're marginalized.
We're totally marginalized
and
at that point.
Here's the question. If we think it's a bad deal, one, they're not even guaranteeing that we can look at it. Can you imagine a deal of this consequence? And they don't want to share it with their own Congress.
How about sharing it with the American people?
Well, they're sharing it with every other person in the Mideast. But here's the deal. If they try to go to the UN Security Council and bypass us and leave us as the last guy standing, then there'll be a violent reaction against the United Nations. 22% of the funding for the United Nations comes from the American taxpayer, and I'm in charge of that account. I'm not going to allow the United Nations to be used as a way to get around the United States Congress for a deal that affects the very existence of Israel and our own national security. The worst possible outcome is for Iran to get a nuclear weapon.
All right, let me get this straight. So if President Obama bypasses Congress, goes to the UN to get the UN to lift its sanctions against the marginalized U.S. Senate, are you saying that you have the authority and the power, Senator Lindsey Graham, to prevent the U.S. from funding the United Nations?
I'm saying that Senator Graham and others would view the UN's action as provocative, marginalize the Congress, and they would be risking the funding that they receive from the American taxpayer.
Risking is a lot different than saying they will.
I would suspend. Here's what I would do. If the UN did something that provocative, lifted sanctions before we ever got a chance to look at it in Congress, if they go directly to the UN Security Council, and the UN Security Council lifts all sanctions before we ever get a chance to look at this deal, absolutely I would suspend funding the United Nations, because I don't think your money should go to an organization that irresponsible.
All right. Do you have the authority? I mean, do you have the authority to do this yourself?
No, I'll have to get my colleagues to agree with me. I would introduce, but I'm in charge of the account.
That's what I mean. You're in charge of the account.
I'm in charge of the account. We write the checks. And what I would do in that event is try to write into the bill that I'm in charge of suspension of aid to the funding to the United Nations if they do something that provocative.
Any doubt in your mind that you would do everything you could to cut off funding for the UN if the president did that?
There is zero doubt in my mind, because what it would do is set a precedent that would be dangerous for future Congresses. And this deal, if it's a good deal, I'll vote for it, but I'm not going to be dealt out. They're about to make a mistake for the ages. In my view, when he drew the red line in Syria and did nothing about it, the Iranians are not taking him serious. And we started with dismantling their program as the goal. Now we're locking in a program that can be broken out in a year. We've changed the goal. And Arabs and Israelis have one thing in common. They're not going to let the Iranians have a nuclear advantage over them. The president's about to start a nuclear arms race in the Mideast if he doesn't watch it.
Senator, thank you.
Thank you.
And straight